since we met last month. But I did want to mention an upcoming engagement opportunity for EAG members to get involved in working with us and discussing how we implement the Climate Commitment Act. And this would be outside of our regular EAG meetings if you're interested. Ray sent some information to you via email last week when he sent out the meeting materials. The plan is to kick off engagement next week, starting on February 21st, and to hold some meetings also in March and in April. Please reach out to Kalima Yakupova in our regulatory group if you're interested in learning more and may want to get involved, or you can reach out to our team and we'll connect you with Kalima if you're interested. So I think that's the only regulatory update I have for now. So I think if we could move to the next slide, I'll just start walking through some of the themes that we heard in the last two EAG members. Boy, it's only 5:09 meetings that we held in January. Given that we met twice in January and we're already at our February meeting, I just want to acknowledge that we're still working on our feedback report that we usually send to you, responding to the different questions and comments that came up. So we'll get that to you as soon as it's ready. But in the meantime, tonight I just wanted to take a couple of minutes here and highlight some of the themes that we heard from you all last month and respond to those a little bit in this time. So the first one we heard that we were reflecting on was around the bill discount rate program. And we heard EAG member interest in understanding the bill discount rate program and how the eligibility requirements may work, particularly for low-income customers and senior customers. And so as a reminder, we are hosting an informational session with Suzanne Saskell on that team. That's on March 1st. And so you should have an invitation and a calendar appointment in your inboxes. If you need us to resend it to us, just let us know. Hopefully during that session, we can provide some more information on the work that's underway, working with our low-income advisory committee members and others as they design that program, and hopefully answer any questions that you may have that we haven't addressed yet. So that opportunity is coming up on March 1st. Another question that was raised during our January, I think it was not the 31st, but the January 23rd meeting, was around how environmental justice is considered, particularly when we're looking at construction and operation of new infrastructure which may be cited in marginalized communities. And so this came up when we were discussing our long-range resource planning. And so when that isn't considerations for impacts for a particular location of a program is not something that the resource planning process directly addresses. And that's more the nature of how we do long-range planning. It's often looking at like a generic resource type, like what is the cost and opportunity for Montana wind resources or Eastern Washington wind, and comparing those two things. But it isn't getting down to the specific project level resources and location. So it makes it hard to get into the implementation aspects of a specific project. But that said, environmental justice planning and consideration is a part of our decision making and other processes. And one example is our delivery system planning, where we're considering projects at that individual project level. And so I just want to note that delivery system planning, we brought that to you, I think it was our November meeting, and it's a topic that we're taking up again at our March meeting. And so we'll share that question with the team as they prepare for that conversation. So hopefully we can talk a little bit more about how environmental justice plays into our thinking today and how we might be able to evolve that as we evolve our delivery system planning tools. Another theme, an area of discussion last month was part of our overview on the natural gas utility and how we plan for that. We heard questions around PSC's plans for our targeted electrification pilot, and we heard also comments and questions about how equity will be integrated into the gas utility more broadly. So we'll be considering those questions and comments. You'll see some feedback from us in our feedback report when we're able to get that to you. And we'll be considering those questions and comments, particularly as we plan for the next resource planning cycle, the next integrated resource plan, as we work to consider how we can better integrate equity and frameworks into that, into those resource plans. And then one other theme that I wanted to mention related to the equity discussion guide. We heard a request to clarify what the equity discussion guide's purpose is and the audience, which is a great question. In response to that, we're working to compile the 3 sections that we brought to you over a series of meetings into one complete single document, and we'll include some guidance in there about how to think about the discussion guide. I can say our hope was that it could serve as a helpful guide for discussions that we have with the EAG. It could help PSE staff, for example, use it to better prepare for the conversation and the types of questions you all may want to be asking, and ensure that we're ready to roll up our sleeves and address those kinds of considerations. I still want to note, though, it's really just a guide. It's not an exhaustive document for every conversation you might want to have, and we didn't intend it to be. It's really hopefully a helpful starting point in thinking through some of the areas and considerations, and hopefully spark some further conversation and thought. So hopefully that helps a little bit, and we'll be, as I said, we'll be compiling that and sharing that with you here soon. So that's what I have, Rose. I think from here I was going to pass it to TJ to provide an update on our steering committee work.
Yes, thank you. So TJ, we're turning to you.
Sure. Good evening, everyone. I am TJ Protho. I am going to talk to you about steering committees. So if you could go to the next slide. So we have a steering committee for this EAG group. We usually meet once a month to look at the agenda for this meeting and kind of talk about things that we want to add. And part of that discussion in the steering committee was, how do we form other committees? What does that look like? Who else is in it? And after several conversations, we decided that either the EAG or the steering committee can propose a committee based on topic of interest, or if there's a deliverable request. What that would look like is, let's say that somebody comes and presents a topic, or we're talking about a topic, and we think, okay, this topic is so big that it needs more attention. And so in that instance, a committee could be formed to dive deeper into that topic and make sure that it has clear objectives and deliverables. It won't be just because a lot of people are interested in it. It would be more so that it needs more discussion and it has to have some kind of deliverable. And then that committee would report back to this EAG group with recommendations. Also, bandwidth will be considered. We don't want EAG members to join a bunch of committees and feel overwhelmed or overworked. One example, as I mentioned, is the steering committee. Another one is the equity forum planning committee. I think that we saw a need for an equity forum and more discussion about equity. And so it was proposed that there be a committee, and we've been meeting, I think, once or twice a month to decide how we're going to approach that equity forum. And at this time, there's no urgent need or no topic that requires a committee. But do know that that is a tool that we may tap into in this EAG group.
Thank you, TJ.
For any questions or clarifications?
Yes, I think we should open it up, and to include any questions that you may have based on what Kara shared in terms of her updates on any of the topics that she raised, because those are themes that came from the EAG. And if you require further clarification or have any questions, please do feel free to raise your hand or put any further inquiries in the chat. Are there any questions for either TJ or for Kara? I'm going to turn it to you.
Great. Thanks, Rose. Thanks, everyone, for having me back. Let's go ahead and jump right into this and flip through here. So a lot of this is going to be quick background, so I may run through it fairly quickly. And if needed, go ahead and put a hand up and I can stop and recover any sections that we need. I just want to make as much time as possible for questions. I'm talking today about the IIJA, as Rose explained earlier. That's the Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act, sometimes confused with the Inflation Reduction Act, but the helpful way to think about the difference between the two of them is the IIJA was the big bipartisan infrastructure law that passed in 2021, and it's mostly grant funding for sort of the infrastructure that exists out in our world, new, but much of it existing, that needs to be hardened, reinvested, and improved to continue operating out into the future. And then the Inflation Reduction Act, think of that mostly as tax credits. There are some grant opportunities and some other really exciting things like customer appliance rebates, but the bulk of that bills kind of tie into the energy infrastructure world is tax credits for renewable investments. So again, we're going to focus on the infrastructure law today, and specifically in a couple of sections within the energy titles of the bill, where there's opportunities for PSE as a recipient of federal funds to go out and compete for federal dollars. I've previously presented to this group and maybe iterations of back in January 2022, and then last November, where we teed up the forthcoming concept papers, which you should have in front of you as reference material today. I'll broadly cover those and some of the high points of them in the presentation. Next slide. For those that were here in November, nothing has changed on this slide except for the citations here on the bottom, but remember the way we approached our opportunities within the IIJA and the overall approach that we wanted to have with pursuing federal funding under the infrastructure law was we wanted to set out some goals and achieve an outcome, all of which were customer centric. The first is we want to lower costs and improve affordability for customers by pursuing federal dollars to offset those that our customers would normally pay to us, and we recover through rates. Second, we want to accelerate the clean energy transition. And what we really want to do here is, continue to hit our CETA commitments and meet our Beyond Net Zero goals by accelerating the clean energy transition through the statute of the IIJA and what the IIJA allows. We want to basically improve the system that we're utilizing to get to the clean energy transition today. And then third, we want to meet the Biden administration's Justice 40 initiative in both letter and spirit, ensuring that the investments that we're making into our system meet the Justice 40 commitments to 40% of investment dollars flowing into communities that have historically been further to the back of the line, either disadvantaged or vulnerable, or in some way named or impacted by those investment decisions. And that, we want to also make sure that the benefits of those investments are tracking into those communities as well. And then finally, those goals fed into what we were seeing as our preferred outcome here, which was really maximizing the size of an award, right? The more cost savings we get are sort of directly attributable to the size of grants we're capable of winning. So we needed to figure out the right mixture of packages and projects we wanted to put together that were both very highly competitive and maximize potential for an award. So I referenced some dockets here at the bottom. Why don't we actually go to the next slide? As folks in this group know, PSE had a rate order settled and approved in December, which we have put into effect now. And there were a couple of conditions in that rate order, some of which dealt with the IIJA and the IRA. But again, with the IIJA that we're talking about today, first, the commission is conditioning our rates on ensuring that we are going after IIJA grant dollars. So some of the wordy language up here, the retrospective review of provisional plan, they want to make sure that what we are pursuing in infrastructure dollars is are projects that we were going to plan to do, or which have the potential to lower customer rates or offset those rate pressures. While we think it would be really exciting to go after some, incredibly transformational projects, the reality is that with the grant limitations and the statute limitations, we may not be as competitive as some others if we went after those opportunities, or we may be ruled out because they were not within the statute. So what the commission was really challenging us to do was say, go look at all the investments you're intending to make and see which ones the federal government will help offset costs of. So we've done that. We began that work in December of 2021. And I think I presented to all of you last November on some of those broad capital projects that we were going to pursue. And then second part here is really just document your decision making. Help the commission understand which opportunities you're going for, which ones you're not. Where are you competitive? Where are you not? What opportunities are of the highest value to your customers and can you go get today? So again, I think we've been really forward thinking in ensuring that we were documenting and applying some very strategic lenses to the opportunities we're going after, because there is a cost to preparing one of these very large grants, and we're currently doing 2 of them. So let's move forward to the next slide. But just wanted to give you all a sense of how, I guess, how official this is getting. We are moving forward. We have submitted concept papers. You see that the commission was demanding that we do so, but of course we were working towards those anyways. And in your packet, you've received under your reference material one of the concept papers, which is called Topic Area 1 or Grid Resilience. This is maybe the most competitive of the 2 that we are pursuing. They have the largest award size. There will be roughly 10 of them issued in phase 1, so about $1 billion in funding will go in phase 1, of which 7 awards, approximately 7, will be available to utilities of Puget's size. Broadly speaking, these grants are intended to help you make your grid more resilient to natural disasters, disruptions, outages, to the impacts of climate change, storms, seismic activity. The main indicator here is reducing customer minutes interrupted. So if you lose service, how long is your service down for? That measures 2 things, right? That measures in part the number of disruptions you're experiencing and the duration. So the intent of this opportunity is to really reduce the amount of time people are without power. Our full application is going to be due April 6th. And just for some examples down here, mitigating wildfire risks, addressing our known worst performing circuits, and going after some routine opportunities as well, such as enhanced vegetation management and undergrounding of our facilities where it makes the most sense to do so from a safety and mitigation perspective. Let's go ahead and move forward. So what's outlined in the concept paper? About $250 million of PSE investment that we intend to put into broad system upgrades. I think every single one of our counties, we serve 10 counties here at PSE. Each and every one of them would be impacted in some way through funding opportunities. And what we've asked the federal government is to match 101 million or 100 million in our investments where we are making those investments in Justice 40, highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations. So approximately 40%, I believe it's 40.5% of the total $250 million investment we plan to make in grid resiliency efforts will flow into one of the federal and Washington state named communities. And we're asking the federal government if they're willing to help post the match to help us accelerate those investments in those named communities. That is the specific focus of our grant application. In the application, we're also asked by the government to outline the 5 cities, or we took it to mean more broadly like the communities where those investments are planned. Within topic area 1, you can see that there's a significant investment in our northern region, Bellingham and some of Bellingham's immediate surrounding area, Everson, which is a little northeast of Bellingham, as well as Olympia, Kent, and then Ellensburg may surprise some of you on the call today. We don't serve we don't do electric service in the city of Ellensburg, but we do in areas outside of it. But there is a vulnerable infrastructure that runs through Kittitas County. We have transmission lines there, which could begin posing a larger fire threat. So we do need to address it there. And even if you're running infrastructure through cities that you don't serve directly through distribution, we intend to make sure that it's not our infrastructure that's causing further problems. So this is a broader overview of what you'll see in your reference materials under topic area 1. I'm going to ask to move to topic area 2, and we'll keep this moving so you guys have time for questions. Topic area 2, slightly smaller. Total project award size will be in the $30 to $50 million range. This is for modernization and flexibility types of investments. Think of them as enabling upgrades. The other word I hear a lot is self-healing. So if you were to have a tree branch fall on a segment of line in a community, the idea here is that with a smarter grid, we can sort of section off those that are impacted by the disruption, by the branch falling on a line, and continue to service as many of that, that community's neighbors as we can through automatic switching. If you're going to get to that world, you have to make sure that your substations are communicating with you in real time. We need to do a large systematic overhaul of the way that our communication systems operate back with our home base in real time. And so that's a large part of what we'll be asking the federal government to help us match here. But also in here are preparing circuits for higher penetrations of electric vehicles, distributed energy resources, think rooftop solar, community solar. And there's also some really cool opportunities here to sort of, manage voltage in a way that we can get higher levels of energy efficiency simply by using the existing infrastructure we have today, or by adding capacity in areas where we know communities are growing or there are business opportunities within a community. Let's move forward. So again, we'll dive into this. Again, in your reference material, this is topic area 2. What Puget has identified is about $103 million of investment, of which $62 million would be focused in communities that are labeled as a Justice 40 highly impacted community or vulnerable population. So approximately 60% of this investment would reach those communities. So a little higher than our $100 million ask. But again, here, this is where we identify the top 5 sort of cities and immediate areas, communities where we would see the bulk of that investment go. Again, you see Bellingham at near the top of the list. We have a lot of infrastructure upgrades in Bellingham that are required and that we need to do in order to accelerate the transition in the northern end of our service territory, but also Federal Way, Bremerton, Olympia, and Puyallup. Lots of opportunity here and lots of strategic alignment we see with topic area 2 and some of our communities' climate action plans. Okay, go ahead and skip through this. So status update, where are we now? We submitted our concept papers in December, and as of last week, we were encouraged by the Department of Energy to move forward on both of our papers. To give folks a little understanding of what or how significant that is, the Department of Energy received hundreds of applications in both topic areas. We understand they disqualified roughly 50 to 60% of them based on either merit or technical arrangement of the papers themselves. So we still have a lot of competition here, but making it through the first hurdle was pretty significant for us. So in order to push ourselves over the edge and to win one or both awards, what we're doing is engaging a broad group of stakeholders and interested parties that we wanted to make you aware of and solicit your feedback on. So where we started, of course, some of those top 5 communities that I just showed you on the previous slides. Where we know we're going to be doing a lot of system work, we want to make sure local leadership and community organizations are engaged and aware of the work we want to do. And if applicable, they're able to leverage that into, either new opportunities under the IRA, right? Going after solar investments. Now that your circuit has been enabled, there may be a new drive to go and pursue rooftop solar, a community solar project, maybe school bus electrification, et cetera. So we've started with the communities. We've received some early commitment and support from a few, either communities that we have a letter in hand or where we have a verbal or written agreement that they want to pursue. A letter of support include Bremerton, Bellingham, Olympia, Everson, Federal Way, and Kent. There's probably others as well, but those are the ones that our team's kind of reported back on so far. And then after we started the first level of engagement with our communities, we went to the community-based organizations as well. So this is where our customer or our community engagement team, sorry, has been hitting the pavement over the last week to roll out to community-based organizations the type of work we want to do and the benefits that we hope that the system work will provide for them and the constituencies they serve. Top organizations of interest for us right now include organizations that either house the underhoused, address housing needs in the community, food banks, because of their high reliance on electrical reliability. If you're keeping cold food storage, like dairy, you got to keep it cold at all hours. So food banks are a vulnerable service for disruptions. Of course, senior centers and senior service organizations and organizations which help those with life-saving support devices. So we've been reaching out to some of our contacts there to see where we can improve and where we may be able to find support. And then lastly, we've started engaging environmental groups and then labor and workforce development partners that we have within our region. I heard today from NWEC, the Northwest Energy Coalition, that they're interested in supporting us. And then we've been reaching out through the Labor Council and some other workforce development opportunities as well, technical colleges, and some of our partnered universities to ensure that we can get their support and that they've got a role to play here if we end up winning a grant and need to pursue, even more, and we're able to open more apprenticeship opportunities. So that's where we are today. We can even return to this slide in a moment. I think I've got one more before I get to Q&A, but we can return to this slide in a moment if folks want to take a look at it while they get their questions. So why have I returned? Well, now that we know we have been encouraged to move forward, we're unfortunately under a really tight deadline. Our first of these applications is due a little over a month from today. So we are asking the advisory group if you would like to provide a formal letter of support. I believe in your packet was a draft letter. Obviously, that is open to edits, but we would love support from this advisory group to accompany our applications to the federal government on both of our topic area submissions if we can. We know that you've also got ideas. You guys are in an advisory group. You know folks in these communities, you are members of these communities. Tell us where we should be reaching out outside of organizations and maybe municipalities that I had already listed off. We want to get out and make sure as many people know the work we're trying to do and the reason we're doing it as possible. So I'm open to any feedback that folks have. And then I guess that kind of flows into number 3 too. Any additional pieces of information you've got for me or concerns or opportunities you have you'd like to make me and our team aware of, we're all ears. We've got about 4 weeks to figure this out, maybe 2 to 3 to have those meaningful conversations with impacted organizations. Of course, our work doesn't end at the application stage. A lot of what we can put into our application is plans for future engagement. But this is these grants are all about making sure that the communities, the municipalities, and the organizations that you serve as an electric provider are your partners, and that they're there to support you as you can be to support them. So with that, I think the last slide, I was incorrect earlier. This would be a potential timeline for a proposed letter of support if the EAG determines that this is something that it wants to pursue and assist PSE with. We would need feedback on a draft letter, which is previously provided in your reference materials, by next week. And then we would need some sort of a fairly rapid turnaround to incorporate any edits or suggestions from the EAG, which could go to potentially, I think, a vote by the end of, next week, or very early the following. And then we would need a letter in hand approximately by March 3rd for inclusion in both the body of our grant applications and for attachment in our ultimate application package. So with that, I will stop talking and go to Q&A. I'm sure there's a number of questions you all have. I know I've thrown a lot at you.
Welcome.
Thanks, Rose, and good evening, everyone. My name is Zaya Lomax, and I'm a Regulatory Affairs Initiatives Manager on Brian Tyson's team. It's really nice to meet everyone tonight. And as some of you may know, PSE worked with EAG to develop an initial equity assessment framework as part of our 2021 CEIP. In Chapter 8 of our CEIP, we made a commitment to build upon that work for our biennial update. So as part of PSE's commitment to develop its equity assessment for its biennial update, PSE hired a consultant, Illum, to assist PSE in better understanding how PSE can build a robust equity assessment framework. Illum is a consultant specializing in the energy sector, helping clients to build a cleaner, safer, and more resilient energy infrastructure to ultimately build stronger communities. Its focus is on advancing, re-envisioning, and equitably transforming the energy industry. Tonight, we have Eileen Hannigan and Lee Michael from Illum, who are here to give an overview of the draft report that Illum provided to PSE. And with that, I would like to welcome both Eileen and Lee.
Thanks, Aya. It's great to be on the call with you all tonight. My name's Lee Michael. I'm a senior managing consultant here at Illum, and I'm joined by my colleague, Eileen Hannigan, a VP at Illum, who you'll hear in just a few minutes. If we could go to the next slide. So just very briefly, Illum is a team of quantitative and qualitative researchers based all over the country, including Seattle, which is where I am based. Our sweet spot is supporting clients respond to policy at the intersection of energy and equity. And we've done work with other clients across the country, most recently in New York, Connecticut, and Illinois, as you can see on the right-hand side. So we're really excited to work with PSE on helping to understand how the equity framework fits into their CEIP goals. I also want to highlight that as we move through the slides, we'll be pausing after every few slides to get feedback or questions. We really don't want to talk at you for the next 30 minutes or so. But if you do have a question that comes up, just feel free to, put it in the comments, and we can address those when we get to the pausing points. Okay, let's go to the next slide. So our objective was to review PSE's current equity assessment framework within the CEIP and to identify areas to better align it with CETA, the Commission, and PSE's larger equity objectives. I really want to clarify that we conducted this equity assessment within the parameters of PSE's Clean Energy Implementation Plan, or CEIP. We understand that PSE and the EAG are driving equity efforts at the company level and in other business areas. And while we do recommend coordinating all equity efforts to whatever level possible, we also do want to acknowledge that PSE needs to move forward with these CEIP specific equity efforts in the near term. Just a quick overview of our approach. So we conducted a documentation review, including a deep dive into the CEIP, into the language around CETA, testimony transcripts, stakeholder comments. We attended EAG public meetings and then reviewed meeting notes and follow-up items. We interviewed internal stakeholders or within PSE, and then we also assessed similar efforts that other utilities and agencies are taking around the country. Next slide, please. Okay. So PSE developed its first CEIP to comply with the initial requirements of CETA. The CEIP is structured around this equity framework that you see in this slide, and it seeks to address considerations around barriers and burdens that customers may face, specific actions that PSE can take to address those burdens and drive clean energy, and identifying communities of interest. So while this first CEIP does appear to meet the CETA requirements as it's written in the legislation, our team did identify several opportunities for PSE to perhaps build upon the CEIP equity framework to focus on areas within PSE's sphere of influence and control. So we're going to discuss our suggested modifications to this framework throughout the next slides, but you can think of this slide, slide 27, as the original equity assessment framework that we're going to refer back to. Next slide, please. Okay. Oh, I think, can we go back? Thank you. We're missing the core part if we skip past that. So we suggest that PSE modify the energy equity assessment framework as we illustrate in the figure in this slide. This modification reflects 3 really important updates. First, defining PSE's CEIP-centric equity vision, which is in that light blue box at the top. And then from that flows, all of the other steps of the framework. The next important update is actually calling out the process of identifying and defining populations of interest, which is that purple box on the far left, and defining customer benefits, the goals and outcomes within that. And that's that teal box in the center. So we're going to talk a bit more through this in the next few slides. But one other thing that I just wanted to highlight is that since feedback from members of the community is critical to achieve PSE's equity vision within its program and investments, we also suggest incorporating insights from public participation into every step of this framework. And our suggestions complement or align with the strategies that PSE outlined in its public participation plan. One last thing before we move into the different steps of the framework, I just want to call out that we're going to reference the steps in both the original framework, which is slide 27, and then our suggested new framework, which is slide 28, the one that you're looking at now, as we move through the rest of this discussion. So please feel free to refer back to these slides in your PDF as we reference them if helpful. Before I pass it along to Eileen, I'd just like to pause if there are any initial questions or feedback.
All right, thank you, Lee. And we can go to the next slide, please. All right, so now what we want to do is kind of walk through each of those boxes on the graphic we just looked at and talk about our suggested revisions to the framework. And so this slide and the following slides will have a similar format where we have a box that describes sort of why that piece of the framework matters, and then a box describing what our suggestions were to PSE for enhancements or modifications. So as we just talked about, that box across the top in the light gray, is our suggestion that, PSE define a CEIP specific equity vision. And, this is important, it matters. Oh, I see there's a hand up. Okay, great. So as back to that top box, defining the CEIP specific equity vision. And we, highlighted this because that shared vision will really center equity in decision-making and investments and engender transparency, both internally and externally. In other words, the goal really is to ensure that the why for PSE behind the what it is trying to achieve is going to be clearly communicated through the framework. For next steps, we suggest that PSE first commit to defining that CEIP specific equity vision, and then carefully establishing the parameters of what it can control and affect through the CEIP. And this includes, consideration of the dimensions of equity, such as distributive or procedural, that PSE will bring into that vision. And then from this, we suggest that PSE, work to establish that definition and then communicate it out. And happy to take your question, Dennis.
This is just an observation.
Great. Well, we can advance to the next slide. All right, so if you recall, or if you have it up, there was that purple box on the far left that I referenced earlier, defined populations. And as I noted, this was a step that was not called out in the original framework, but it was definitely a step that was undertaken. I understand a lot of effort went into thinking about the vulnerable populations and defining those. But because it is a large effort to do that, and because it has a big impact on who benefits from PSE's equity effort, how those populations are defined, we thought it would be helpful to call that out as a specific phase in the framework as a standalone step. So with that, then we did have some next steps to kind of build on that work that's already been done. So we suggest that PSE consider how it might want to iterate on the vulnerable populations definitions, including both geographic indicators and non-geographic indicators. So a geographic designation is a useful method. It's convenient to identify priority communities by things like census tract or other, geographic definitions, but there may be households outside of those communities that experience disproportionate impacts related to climate change or energy service delivery. So we suggest that PSE may want to look at household criteria such as service reliability or referencing the Justice 40 disadvantaged communities indicators to identify customers that may not currently be receiving equitable energy services and benefits as a way to iterate on that definition. And I'll pause here in case there's questions on the population, since that's a meaty one. Okay, so the second box in from the left, is identify the current state, barriers and burdens. So in the current equity framework, current state and burdens are presented as separate items. And while it is the case, we looked at it, we thought through that, existing disparities and burdens are really highly interconnected and closely tied to how highly impacted communities and vulnerable populations are defined. So in short, the current reality or the current state of the burdens customers face are intrinsically connected to one another. So we're recommending kind of pulling these into a single step in the framework, simplifies the framework a little bit, and also makes it more straightforward for PSC to identify barriers customers might face. In terms of suggested next steps, we suggest using the data PSC already collects. PSC can report on the current barriers that customers face, and this could become, the baseline by which future progress can be measured. And finally, we recommend that PSC could conduct research with vulnerable customers and named communities to understand other barriers that they may face in accessing services related to energy, resilience, education. And we can move to the next slide, and I'll turn things back to Lee.
Great, thanks, Eileen. Okay, so our next step in the process, the teal box right in the middle, if you're referring to the suggested modified framework, is around defining customer benefits. So both goals and interim targets to meet those goals. After PSC has defined the barriers that customers face, or we could think of it as the current state, it needs to set goals and measurable targets around how it will address those barriers. We think of goals as the customer benefit indicators, or CBIs, that are present in the CEIP now. And by defining consistent measurable targets to accompany each CBI, PSC can measure its progress toward equitably serving customers and meeting those CBIs. So our thought here is that these targets should reflect the needs of named communities and align with those needs as articulated by named communities, which is where the public participation comes in. Can be measured using data that PSC collects and has access to, reflects the larger goal, so ties into the larger customer benefit goals that PSC is trying to achieve, and are simple and achievable. Our thought here is that more is not better. Having 3 or 4 indicators that PSC can accurately measure and track is more effective than having, say, 10 actions that PSC may not be able to deliver on. So suggested next steps around here is, like I said, defining those goals and tying CBIs to each goal. And then within that, having targets that kind of level up to each of those goals and tracking progress. Okay, I am going to move us on to the next slide because I know time is of the essence. So next we'll talk about specific actions, which are a key component of the CEIP. Specific actions articulate how a utilities clean energy implementation plan will help to realize the requirements that are set forth in CETA. So, we understand and PSE understands how important specific actions are and what a key part of the CEIP they are. And one thing that we heard from stakeholder feedback that we reviewed was that PSE received some comments around the specificity and consistency of specific actions. So this is really kind of just a housekeeping item. To remedy this, we suggest that PSE build on its template to develop an even more standardized format with a standard level of detail that articulates what each specific action is trying to achieve, who it is trying to achieve it for, how it will do it, and then how it will measure progress. And then I think we can go to the next slide and then have some conversation. So finally, we move to the last step in the framework, which is around measuring costs and benefits. Our team really wants to highlight that the process of measuring costs and benefits can only happen when PSE has aligned on what it's trying to achieve and how it's going to do it. So in other words, this is very much the final step in the framework. So our short-term suggestion is that PSE focus on defining its CEIP-centric vision, defining populations, identifying the current state, visioning the customer benefits it wants to enact, and then articulating the specific actions it will take to make that happen. Then they can focus on the measuring of costs and benefits that flow from that. Our team has worked with clients around the country, most recently New York, around different frameworks that can measure costs and benefits. So there are standardized processes by which to, dig into this process. So PSE might explore the creation of a benefits framework that helps to measure those costs and benefits. Okay, I know we threw a lot of talking at you all at 6:45 p.m. on a Monday. So I understand if there are either lots of questions or if folks are still absorbing this, but we are here for any questions or feedback.
Well, thank you, Lee.
Thank you, Rose. And I'll move through this quickly. I wanted to chat with you. We wanted to chat with you tonight about the public participation plan. You'll hear me say P2 plan quite often because trying to say public participation plan quickly doesn't work very well for me. So P2 plan, that's an acronym that I'll use tonight and we'll use for a while going forward. See, to your earlier comment too about specifics and examples, I think the Illume conversation and the P2 plan are both pieces that we're sort of laying the groundwork for future conversations. And you'll see these come back into conversations as we head into our CEIP biennial update planning later this year. So not all the answers tonight, but hopefully we're providing some insights that will help us in our conversations down the road. Will you go to the next slide, please? I'm going to go over this one really quickly. So you saw this slide last time. 3 layers are playing: the IRP, which is a 20-year plan updated every 2 years. In the IRP is the Clean Energy Action Plan. And then the Clean Energy Implementation Plan is our 4-year roadmap for clean electricity. And if you'll go to the next slide, the P2 plan is tied to the CEIP plan or its updates. So in 2021, PSE filed a public participation plan with the CEIP. In May of 2023, we're required to submit a revised or an updated plan to the commission, and we'll do the same thing in 2025. So May, we submit our plan, and then in November of the same year, the CEIP or the update to the CEIP is due. And what this does is allows us to plan for the engagement work that needs to happen to help update the CEIP, as well as provides a roadmap for our P2 work through that cycle that follows the CEIP update or delivery through the following year, roughly 1.5 years. All right, next slide, please. So we submitted our first P2 plan with the 2021 CEIP. Again, that was for the years 21 through early 2023, and we'll update it again May 1st of this year. What we wanted to just note on this slide is these were 6 goals that were included in the 2021 plan. And when we come back and talk with you next month, we'll have a longer period of time to have a conversation with you about what should be in the update of the P2 plan. And I want to stress the word update. We're not writing a full P2 plan this year. We're still waiting for a commission decision, which could include feedback on the P2 plan that we submitted. And so this version will be an update to that plan with your feedback with and also responding to commission guidance as it comes in. And so I won't read all of these goals, but I would ask if you have a minute to look through these slides before our next meeting to take a look at what are the goals that we included in the P2 plan. That'll be really helpful for our next conversation, because one of the questions that I think we'll be asking is, should these goals look different? Are we missing anything that's super important? Should we refine them, et cetera? Next slide, please. So the P2 plan does cover a lot of ground. It not only addresses engagement as we develop the CEIP, but it also must address engagement as we implement the CEIP, including development and deployment of programs and services. An example of that kind of layered engagement is the recent conversation that we had with the DER program team, where they came and talked to us about the outreach they're doing to design those programs and deploy those programs. And so when we think about the P2 plan, we have this engagement developing the plan. We have engagement around clean energy education more broadly. We have engagement around new programs and services that support our clean energy transition. So there are multiple layers within the plan that we need to address. And the tactics you see on this slide are a subset of the tactics that are identified in the implementation phase that we'll focus on in 2023 through 2025. And this is another topic we'll come back to you with next month. Again, there's only 8 bullets on here. There were, I don't know, a couple of dozen different tactics in the P2 plan. We just wanted to show you some examples. And again, if you have time to take a little bit of a look at this before we come back next month, that would be fantastic. Next slide, please. And I know I'm almost out of time here, Rose. So, but I think I'm close to getting through the end of this. So our plan objectives for this cycle: refine our tactics and approaches based on your feedback, address any guidance that we get from the commission through the CEIP decision process. We want to better reflect those parallel activities that I talked about. So CEIP planning, CEIP education, programs and services development and deployment. We also want to understand better customer name community clean energy awareness. How many people know what a CEIP is, or what clean energy is, or know how to get involved? We need to build that baseline information so that we can understand a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, what progress have we made? Are people better, more aware of what clean energy is and how to get engaged? So that's that last bullet. How do we develop and create those metrics so we can track our progress and then evolve our approaches over time? Next slide, please. And I think it's my last one. Yes. So next steps. We're internally planning for the plan. We have some meetings and we have a plan to write before May 1st. During our March meeting, we'll use that as a work session to really focus in on those goals, objectives, and activities. And then following the March meeting, we'll be working pretty intensively to write that revised plan, get it developed and submitted to the commission by May 1st. So this was all just a primer. Again, if you have a little bit of time to spend with these slides, or even a little more time to take a look at the implementation phase of the P2 plan, which is the latter third of that document that we shared, that would be great sort of extra reading before we get to our meeting next month.